education mean to you? I can say for myself and my fellow online classmates that right now our education is very important. It's worth a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. But how about the education of your children? What about America's children? What's that worth? To them, to us, to our country? Education, especially early education, is a powerful shaper of the people that we become. And unfortunately, our government has made an important decision regarding education in the United States. The Common Core state standards will forever change our country's education system. Derek Mader wrote on teaching.about.com that this is perhaps the biggest shift in educational philosophy in the history of the United States. Much of the population will be significantly impacted by the implementation of the Common Core standards in one form or another. Now, as a parent of children that are receiving a public education, I have to admit I'm a little nervous. As any parent, I long for my children to have a first-class education. But more than anything, I hope that they develop a love of learning and feel the success that comes from learning. And it's important that we set high goals for our children, and standards are necessary to measure that progress. However, we will see today that the Common Core standards are not a compelling solution for quantifying the education our children receive. Because not only does it take control away from the parents and the state districts, it also is harmful to our children's education. So I believe that the education of our children is the sole responsibility of the parent, regardless where the kids receive that education. U.S. Congressman Ron Paul says that under the United States Constitution, the federal government has no authority to hold states accountable for their education performance. In the free society that was envisioned by our founders, schools are to be held accountable to parents, not to federal bureaucrats. According to WyomingAgainstCommonCore.wordpress.com, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers together formed the CCSS, the Common Core State Standards. Now, this was to be a set of academic standards that were common across all states in the nation. These standards are to measure English language arts, mathematics, and science. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as many private corporations, including publishers and assessment companies, funded the development of these standards. So in the spring of 2009, governments and superintendents of all but 2 states signed a Common Core Standards Memorandum of Agreement. And basically what this did was it committed them to the voluntary process of developing and adopting the CCSS. Now, the first and only published draft of the K-12 CCSS was released in March of 2010. A few short months later, in June of 2010, the final was released. It has been adopted by 45 states in 2012. Alaska, Minnesota, Nebraska, Texas, and Virginia have opted out. Wyoming has declined to use the science standards because it teaches global warming, amongst other controversial topics. Full implementation for the states that have signed on will be this coming school year, 14-15. So politicians, parents, and teachers in many states, including Wyoming, are taking their concerns about the CCSS to legislature. So according to the Casper Star Tribune, in February of 2014, House Bill 97 was approved 6-3 by the Wyoming State House Education Committee. This bill would create a panel of teachers and parents that would approve any standards before they were passed by the state. But most specifically right now, it could decline the use of the Common Core standards. It also would prohibit Wyoming from being a part of the No Smarter Balanced Assessment curriculum, which is a multi-state group that would design the testing to see if the states are meeting the curriculum. So now now this bill will head to the House of Representatives. It needs to pass 3 votes there, and then a vote from the Senate Education Committee, and then 3 full votes in the Senate. It's got a long way to go. Pervading this legislation is a concern that parents weren't given enough input when the State Board of Education decided that Wyoming children needed to learn based on the CCSS. Representative Tom Reeder, a Republican from Casper, sponsored this bill in order to counter what he says was an improper process to adopt the standards without parent or local school board input. Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal says it perfectly. He says we cannot retreat from rigorous standards. However, I am absolutely opposed to any kind of federal takeover of a curriculum or federal government involvement in dictating to us our curriculum. So it is especially sorry that parents don't have a say in this process, because what lies ahead for our kids is really scary. The Common Core is designed to develop deep thinking in students and prepare them for college. However, the measurement of this through the standards negates this benefit. So we all know that in schools today, performance is measured by testing. The Common Core is going to make this crazy. Teaching students to take tests should not be the foundation of the education system. Students should be taught to learn so they can develop a lifetime of learning. Diane Ravitch, an education historian who has become the leader of the movement against corporate-influenced school reform, gave a speech to the Modern Language Association in July of 2014 about the Common Core. And in her speech, she asserts, "No nation in the world has inflicted so many changes or imposed so many mandates on its teachers and public schools as America has in the past dozen years. No other nation tests every student every year the way that we do. Our students are way over-tested. No other nation, at least no other high-performing nation, judges the quality of teachers by the test scores of their students." She goes on to say that most research agrees that this methodology is messed up. It's inaccurate, unreliable, and unstable, because the highest ratings will go to the teachers that have the most affluent students. The lowest ratings will go to the teachers of English second language and kids with disabilities. Nonetheless, the U.S. Department of Education wants every state and every district to do this testing. And because of these federal programs, our schools have become obsessed with the standard testing, and we have turned over this testing to testing corporations, and they then have the responsibility for rating, ranking, and labeling our kids, our teachers, and our schools. So Katie Hurley, a child and adolescent psychotherapist and a parenting expert, points out what all this testing does to our kids. She says, "The result of this test-giving, job-loss-fearing style of teaching is written all over the faces of the little kids in the transaction. The people behind the Common Core might think that they are ensuring college or career readiness, but what they are really ensuring is a generation of anxious, robotic children who can memorize answers but don't know how to think." So she gives us 5 specific ways that the Common Core is hurting our kids. Number 1, increased stress. I think all us parents have noticed that in the last year. So with the hyper-focus on the core areas of learning and the constant testing to see if the material is, she says, memorized, understood, kids are constantly under the pressure to perform. Another reason she gives is creativity is dead. Forget about problem solving, group work, and thinking outside the box, she says. These kids need to memorize the core curriculum to take the test so the teacher doesn't lose her job. Creativity then holds no merit, and so they do what they have to do to get by. She makes the point, don't we want to inspire our kids to be thoughtful leaders and world changers? Another reason, our kids have inadequate times to socialize. Schools are cutting out recess because they don't have time to drill in these standards. So kids aren't getting a break, and they're not learning those important social skills between another to learn how to socialize. She also lists poor eating habits and insufficient exercise. We all know childhood obesity is huge right now. Lunch times are 15 to 20 minutes in a lot of places, and they're cutting out recess, and they're cutting PE programs to put the Common Core in, so kids aren't getting exercise. The number one, or the final reason she lists is that there's no time to decompress. Kids need downtime. There's a lot of talk about overscheduling. We all know that about our kids. The stress that comes from doing too much. But even for those kids that their parents manage to underschedule them, they don't have much time between doing homework, maybe doing their one activity, and then getting to bed. There's no downtime to relieve the stress that they're feeling at school. So bestmastersinEducation.com put together a visual of how the Common Core is hurting our kids. So in this, I want you to especially notice that it's kindergarten, okay? So Frog and Toad, they read it in first grade. But it says, the old way was to read the story's events from the beginning, middle, ending to know the progression of a story and to identify the characters and the settings. However, under the Common Core, they have to compare and contrast Frog and Toad's adventures and experiences. They also have to collaborate with the classmates to determine their comparisons. And then for Charlotte's Web, which is a second and third grade lesson, the old way was, who's telling the story? How does Charlotte feel at the end? How do you know that's the way she feels? But the Common Core would say, what's your point of view about Wilbur, the pig that's going to die? How is it different from Fern's point of view about Wilbur? And how is it different from the narrator's point of view? And we're talking about 8 and 9-year-olds that have to come up with this. I can't imagine living under the stress that this type of education would put on me. I don't think any of us face this at home or at work. And we can all agree that we want our kids to be challenged. We want them to learn. We want to be competitive in the world for our kids. We want to prepare them for secondary education and college. But it's obvious that this Common Core needs some serious reevaluation. The people that have the say are not those on the front lines. They're not the parents. They're not the teachers. They're not the principals that see how kids learn every day. And unfortunately, the students are the ones that will be paying the high price for this. Nelson Mandela once said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. It's no doubt that the Common Core will exert powerful change on our education system. But this change will